Alright, this is part 5, I think, of the Callahan reading, page 115. Bear with me, I'm very sick. Just want to bang this out and get to my other readings. Phil. Yeah, it would take care of it. You could put a couple tablespoons of ground up paramagnetic rock in the cow's water, which, of course, is why some cows with paramagnetics don't get sick. I noticed that a long time ago. They don't get sick from these streams with the rocks, but the others were getting sick because they aren't protected. The water was not in contact with weak magnetic rock. That's very interesting. Joe, what if you took a ball like and screwed it right on where the pump comes in and filled it with magnetite, and then let the water go right through the screen before it got into the trough? Phil picks up the container with the paramagnetic rock and metal screw with the antenna as an example. All you need is this on the collar of the cow. Marilyn, I notice now they have numbers clamped to their ears. Phil, all you have to do is take that number, which is probably metal. I don't know if it's metal or maybe it's plastic, and smear some Elmer's glue over it and sprinkle some of that paramagnetic rock in the glue. Joe, it would be nicer if you had a Mobius turned to the left and squeezed it right in there. Phil, it's just as simple as taking that metal thing and putting some of that glue on it and sprinkle some of this on it, and that would be the end of it. I'm gonna say all this. I've got a chance of coming out and saying this and getting it out. Joe, you're making it so cheap that nobody would be interested in it because they couldn't get any money out of it. Phil, that's why. There'll be a guy getting a Medal of Honor saying it. I always wondered why I was getting it, and now I know. God wants people to know about it. I gotta get up there and make a whole speech about paramagnetism. Everyone's gonna sit there and listen to it. Joe, the world needs it. I can't believe that people haven't taken your book apart already. Remember, I told you one time years ago. Phil, I'm an entomologist. I'm not supposed to know anything about physics. Joe, I got a job when I was a kid. When I was about 15 years old, working for a Coca-Cola before the war, World War II. And they decided to raise the prices on cases of bottles for deposit, and so they branded them. Remember, I told you they branded a case with an iron brand? The ones that came back with a brand was worth more money than the ones that weren't branded. Mr. Martin was a pretty sharp businessman, but anyway, he was making money on that too. My job was to make sure they were branded or not. I ended up making a little sensitive magnetometer that would tell me if the cases went by were branded or not. I was getting enough magnetite from the burns to be able to measure magnetics. I learned to measure real flow frequencies of metallics in that, but even when transferred from a hot iron to a piece of wood, you could actually detect the paramagnetics. Phil, the man who discovered that is a man named John Bendel. He was one of the greatest scientists that ever lived. He carved something out of wood one time. He had made a CGS meter out of a vacuum tubes. A huge thing. It wasn't as good as mine because he didn't have solid state physics back then. They had transistors by then. But it was a good enough CGS meter. He sat there watching and saw that this wood was jumping all around. He looked at it, then finally realized it had been branded with a copyright, a little iron oxide transferred by the hot iron. Whoever had it in the lumber yard put his name on it, so he'd know it was his lumber. That little bit of iron oxide from that iron made that piece of wood into a compass. It would turn around and point to north, observing that there's a weak magnetism. He didn't call it anything. He didn't know what it was. He got some of his earlier books. I got some of his earlier books. He's a mountain climber, of which his first book was on mountain climbing. But he wrote 6 books. One of them was called Heat is a Mode of Motion. That was his greatest scientific book ever written. But they just sort of ignored him. That's where I learned most of what I know about infrared, and nobody ever improved on it. Bendel was probably the greatest scientist that ever lived. Joe, you're branding wood like that with an iron and leaving some of the paramagnetics in it. But what about the burnt carbon? Just making sure I'm recording. Let me make this bigger really fast. Oh, I lost my spot. Let me go down. What about the burnt carbon? Let me just check one more time. Okay, cool. Phil, the burnt carbon is neutral because it's diamagnetic. So it's just like the wood. A lot of ranchers noticed that when they branded a cow, they had a lot healthier cow. A rancher told me that back when I was in agriculture, branded cows were always healthier than the ones that weren't branded. They had more energy because of the paramagnetic transference of the iron in the brand. Joe, I had a real hard time branding women though. Would that make them healthy? Winnie, laugh. Yeah, laughs. Phil, all you have to do is carry that in your purse. Joe, make a necklace out of it. Phil, the best way. Ooh, this is interesting. He's gonna tell you what to do. Phil, the best way is to get a quartz crystal and smear it with Elmer's glue. Then rub some paramagnetic powder until it gets into the pores of the quartz. It'll impregnate the little pores of the quartz and you'll never see it except under a microscope, of course, and it'll never wash off. Get some paramagnetism into it and hang it around your neck. You'll never get sick. Joe, you know how they put silver on coins now? They do it with implosion. They blow it on. The silver is so thin, when they make that little explosion over the coin, all the silver is pointed upward. Then it's aligned and it won't wear off. Plating is different because it's like sheets that'll peel off. But when you blow it on, such as with silver, it's more permanent. Now, why couldn't you do that with magnetite and quartz? Phil, you can. If you wanted to make a fortune helping people to get healthy, you just blow silver into a crystal. Joe, so magnetite. Phil, with some magnetite onto a crystal, you'll have a healing device. Interesting. Joe, that would all be under pressure. That would be a piezo effect. Phil, when I was into survival, when I was behind enemy lines, I'd find a rusty tin can and scrape the rust into my water, and I'd never get sick. I was eating all kinds of bad stuff. You might pick watercress out of the stream, but you wouldn't know if there was a cow upstream. You got to be real careful, but I never got sick. I just made sure I had paramagnetics in me. Joe, if they were eating charcoal tablets with iron oxide in it, that would be a beautiful thing. Phil, beautiful. Charcoal and iron oxide would cure for anything. If you put that into somebody's orange juice, it would cure them of leprosy in a week, which I did. I cured 30 to 40 lepers when I was in the Far East. They thought I was the greatest doctor there ever was. Joe, almost like Jesus. Phil, yeah, the natives didn't care if the regular doctors liked me or not. They couldn't care less. I cured people. The medical profession hates my guts and still do. The AMA won't even look at my stuff. At the American Medical Association, I assume. Joe, they can't profit on it. Phil, no money in it. Anybody can go out and get granite or basalt. Joe, well, I fell in love with this iron oxide. I fell really in love with it. Phil, this house is pre-manufactured house. It is a pre-manufactured house. There's no value in it. You can buy a house 10 times cheaper. Joe, but you put magnetite in the walls. Phil, yeah, I did. Joe, there's a man named Tom Brown who built a home in Oklahoma City. I shipped him the magnetite, and he put it in the walls, and oh man, he's got a beautiful house. Phil, I just sprinkle a little of it in the plaster, and people say there's not enough there. And I say, do you believe in transistors? Oh yeah, I believe in transistors. They'd say, well, you take a transistor, and it's a crystal. It's germanium, and you drove it with 4 or 5 molecules of iridium, arsenide, and you got a transistor. Joe, just a coating, just a splattering. Phil, you got a transistor. Joe, they take a piece of quartz crystal just like that and they apply a coat of gallium arsenide, just a tiny coat of it, and it'll collect sun and turn it into electricity, a solar cell. Phil, that's what a silver cell is. It's real easy to make a silver cell. That's what I was doing in World War II. I don't say this when Winnie's around because she doesn't want to hear about the IRA, but the IRA wanted to kill me. Not only did I have a parrot that could tell me that they were coming, but I had a little radio receiver in my pocket that was run by a rock. It would start buzzing in my pocket and they couldn't get close to me. If the parrot didn't say something, just a tuned circuit run by a piece of basalt would save me. Joe, a quartz radio set? Phil, a crystal set using a rock crystal that would work like a quartz crystal but with basalt. Joe, I can't talk about it with Winnie because she doesn't like how I talk about the IRA. I'll probably write a book about it. Joe, you got a dozen books in ya. Phil, I got 18 books already. I need to write one on terrorism. I already got it written, but I need to send it to the acres. Joe, Bruce Halstead was worried about this. Halstead said we're so easy to poison. He said that if these terrorists pick up on these and transfer these frequencies of poison into the things we think are safe, like aspirin, they wouldn't even have to break the seals. Phil, they won't do it though. I found out that God's got a program that will disable stupid people. Terrorists could read all my books. I've got all the frequencies waves of poisons in my 18 books, but they're too stupid to do it. Joe, you think God built in this protection? Phil, God has built stupidity into evil, so there's no problem. Otherwise, I'd be dead. If terrorists weren't stupid, I'd be dead. God, I parachuted behind German lines. I got away from the IRA easy. Marilyn, Dr. Deal, says that books you think are the most important thing. They're extremely strong. Phil, if terrorists weren't stupid, I'd be dead. Joe, I always thought that God just took care of drunks, little children, and people like me. Phil, I believe he does, like you and me. Joe, I shouldn't be alive. I should have been killed a half-dozen times. Marilyn, it sounds like Dr. Callahan here should have been dead more than a dozen times. No, both men have averted death several times in their lives each. Phil, you're probably not as healthy as I am. I don't know if you're overweight. Joe, I am overweight. I just eat too much. Phil, I have a high rate of metabolism. I probably eat as much as you do, but I metabolize it. It just gets burned off. I never sit for too long. I'm sitting here now, but I'm usually up doing something. Marilyn, lately he's been spending too much time sitting on the couch. Joe, I've been a couch potato. Phil, you gotta be careful what you eat. Start eating right and put paramagnetic dust in your water. You make one of these paramagnetic containers and carry it in your pocket and it'll keep you from overeating. Joe, suppose I take some crystals and I put some frequencies in there and I take a Viagra and squeeze it between some rocks and leave it under pressure. Phil, probably get stronger. That's a lot of work just to make it. Joe, I'm thinking about that Viagra. I might be making that. I think you can get the same frequencies. Phil, you can take Viagra, which is a good medicine that puts out real good frequencies, obviously, and put it in one of these things, and you'll live about 10 years longer. Joe, you know what Viagra is. It's nitrous oxide. Phil, is that all it is? Joe, that's all it is. It's as simple as zeolite and Johnny Cat kitty litter. It absorbs the gases. For Viagra, they put together and press it. That's all it is. Phil, some smart guy thought it up. Joe, I think that the guy that thought it up was in Hot Springs, Arkansas. All he did was bubble nitrous oxide in water and called it Happy Hollow Water. All these old men would come around and drink the water, and what it did was help the blood circulation. Nitrous oxide, we've known that for years, but then kitty litter absorbs the gases like ammonia. It pulls it right in. We've known that when Pfizer bought the place down there in Bowie, Arizona, that makes zeolite. We went down there the last time and they had locks on the place. You couldn't even get in. Phil, that's kind of funny because my father retired in Hot Springs because he used to believe in that water, but he died from cigarette smoking. My mother, however, lived to 90. She didn't smoke, of course. Joe, I sold a lot of this iron oxide to Reynolds Metal Company, and they took it up to Area 51 in Nevada. They used it for screening around radiation. Phil, yep, that'll stop radiation. I suggested that to them. That's why this country can't grow so much. This area measures about 2,000 or 3,000 CGS, and that's why we grow so many plants around here. But in other deserts, don't grow. in other deserts don't grow anything because there's not enough paramagnetic rock. Joe, Sedona has about 3,000 CGS, but the strongest I've measured is in central Arizona, right under Black Mountain, and that's where I get the stuff I'm getting. Phil, that's probably getting 10,000 or more. Joe, 19,000. Phil, 19,000. That Black Mountain is the sacred mountain to the Navajo Indians. Joe, sure is, but anyway, that whole mountain is iron. There's something about the sunlight. Iron will run 10, 15, and 20%. But then when it works its way down, there's something about that sunlight. This stuff has been washing through the washes for years and years, and the sunlight enhances it. Phil, right. Paramagnetism stores up sunlight. This container is storing up sunlight in this room here. With the fan going up there, you got an electrical energy too, so it's real strong in this room, Joe. So the movement of the fan creates eddies or currents in the air that transfers magnetic energy. Part 3. The interview continues with Phil and Joe in the room Winnie has just cleaned. Phil, I don't know. There's something about names that men don't pay much attention to. Women remember names a lot better than men. I think what happens to names is that you don't have nothing to hold on to, so they're just floating around out there. So they're harder to remember. Joe, I remember I got in trouble when I was a kid one time. I was trying to remember things and I used to put anchors to them. The teacher was talking about Columbus and I said, 1492 Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Anyway, what I done is combined the words, the wrong words. 2 for the ocean blue and 3 for sea. It didn't work out. Phil, it didn't work that way. 2 instead of 3. Winnie and Marilyn, bring the bird. Winnie and Marilyn, bring the bird. Joe, bring the bird in. Phil, oh, that bird can't stand being by itself. Parrots are social birds. Because they're social, they live in groups. They cannot stand. He'll fly out. I kind of watch him when he flies because he might run into something. Joe, my dad had a parakeet. He thought a lot about that parakeet. Winnie, to the parrot. There you go. That's a nice little parrot. That's a nice little bird. I assume Callahan drew. Yep, P.S. Callahan. That is his art. Cool. The bird flies over to Phil and sitting on the couch, and Joe sitting on the couch. Joe, oh, he wanted to see you. The bird actually settles on Joe's shoulder and remains there during the rest of the interview. Oh, that's nice. Phil, he likes you. Winnie, he might go on his shirt. Marilyn, that's okay if he poops on his shirt. Joe, he knows who's boss. Boy, he's got a big eye. Well, it looks like I got me a bird here. Phil, he's happy to sit there, but he doesn't want you to pick him up. You got a one-tracked mind, birdie. Marilyn, he wants to be in control there. Joe, well, he is. Phil, he does. He wants his photograph taken now. Joe, well, that bottle is something I'm going back to. Phil, you got the right idea. It's actually pretty good the way it is. Joe, well, you know, Dr. Ricketts used to tell me that same thing, and so did Ralph Bergstresser. Joe, no matter what it is, you're going to try to monkey with it. If it's working, don't go any further. You'll sell a lot more Fords or Chevrolets than a Cadillac. Phil, yeah, everyone knows a Ford or Chevrolet works just as good as a Cadillac. They aren't interested in Cadillacs. The only people that own Cadillacs are people that want to show themselves off. Most people only can afford a Chevrolet. Joe, you know, I don't care much for cats. Phil, I don't either. Joe, but I'll tell you, everywhere I go, the cats will jump on my lap. The cats will come up to me because they know I don't care much for them. There's nothing there to like. Winnie, we always had cats on the farm at home. Phil, I didn't like them. Winnie, I know. I had them to keep the rodents and mice out. Phil, yeah, but they're not like dogs. Joe, now, I love dogs. Phil, cats are opportunists. They're just with you because they know they're going to get fed. Joe, and they're so damn arrogant. Phil, cats are arrogant. There's no question about it. Joe, anyway, I'll carry this a little further and get a few things to you. I'm looking forward to finishing your book. Phil, I've got 2 books. It's not hard to write a book. Joe, I'll be tinkering with this for a while. Phil, all this stuff I have in my books. Joe, I'll try to get a hold of Chandra and see if I can get Christopher Bird's last deal and get that to you. Phil, Christopher Bird was a really good friend of mine. Joe, he really loved you too. He really did. I never seen him a single time where he didn't ask if I'd seen you. I really didn't know that much about you. He liked Sedona. He said anytime I'd like to come up and see him, I could come up and see him. He didn't like coming down to the desert, Phil. Sedona is a beautiful area, but those houses up there, Joe, well, what they've done is they got the price of everything so high. Even a trailer lot up there is over $100,000, Phil. It'll probably keep it from getting overcrowded, that's for sure. Winnie, probably is overcrowded. Joe, a lot of rich people. Marilyn, there's a lot of rough land so they can't get close together, which keeps them scattered. Phil, it's pretty scattered, and as long as they keep them separated out, it's like around here you don't even notice the houses. There's a lot of open land still. Joe, I'll try to get with Mr. and Mrs. Fry at Arbico and see if they can start raising dragonflies to wash out the West Nile. Phil, if they're really worried about the West Nile, that's the way to cure it. All they'd have to do is raise enough of them, but that's not hard to do. Joe, dragonflies, they like a little wet environment, but they also like paramagnetic too. Phil, sure, a wet environment and paramagnetics, and you can raise them by the millions. The West Nile virus will be gone in a year. Joe, and you think the way to cure mad cow disease is to wear magnetite around the cow's neck? Phil, hang one of these around the necks and you won't have to worry about the mad cow disease anymore. The disease is partly caused by the insecticides, but the way it protects them is with paramagnetics. There's so much of the insecticides around now that the best way to protect the cow is with weak magnetic fields. They even found DDT in the Antarctic. Joe, yeah, I heard that, even on the little American side. Phil, it takes 30 years to break it down, so it'll take another 100 years. Joe, and yet if you expose it to paramagnetics and sunshine, it's broken down almost instantly. Phil, there's none around here and you can't even get a reading of it because the ground is full of paramagnetics. Joe, you take that little deal right there and sprinkle some around the schoolyard and you won't find a trace of it in 8 hours. Or 8 hours later. Phil, there wouldn't be any DDT in the schoolyard. Joe, electrified hydrocarbons, they call them. Phil, strangely enough, the schools that have paint over on the green and the asphalt parking lots are highly paramagnetic. It's hard on the bones if you trip and fall, but it's a lot better with bluegrass or the asphalt. Joe, so the old paved asphalt roads are healthier than the concrete? Sure, Phil. Sure, just look at the weeds that grow up along the edges. The weeds are full and tall. If I ran out of paramagnetic rock and that happened to me in Ireland, I just went out and chipped some asphalt off the road and put it in one of those containers. The bird is picking at Joe's face. It had been playing with Joe the whole time. Winnie, he's really checking you out. Phil, he's checking you out all right. He's trying to figure out your facial beard. It's a lot like mine. Marilyn, he's thinking, how come there are two of you all of a sudden? All laugh. Joe, well, I get along with kids, dogs, and now birds. It's people I have trouble with once in a while. Phil, I never had any problem with kids. 2 girls followed me around. Winnie, I'm not going to say anything. Marilyn, were you one of them, Winnie? Joe, you picked the right one, Winnie. Marilyn, you got the cream of the crop. Phil, I got the cream of the crop. I think God picked the right ones for us. Joe, I think I made the right choice, too. I got the same one I started with. But, all my kids have been lucky. I had one that her husband got on drugs. One got divorced. So, all my kids have been lucky? Oh, okay, I guess he's being sarcastic. I had one that her husband got on drugs. One got divorced and she's remarried now to a lawyer, and I got a really good granddaughter out of it. We only had one divorce in all our family. It was the drugs, and it bothered me real bad. Marilyn, the kids turned out good. We have daughter and son-in-laws with good grandchildren. They're not all perfect, but close enough to perfect. Joe, we have one that has a little trouble reading, and yet he has good grades, but he has to work hard, real hard. Winnie, he wants to learn because he studies. Marilyn, he's got a mother and father that are willing to work with him and encourage him. He's pretty good now that I think of it. It was when he was younger that they had to work with him. Marilyn and Winnie continue talking about their children and family while Joe and Phil carry on with their conversation. Joe, I've got fungus on one hand and my toes after going down to South America that I've never been able to get rid of. Phil, you take some of that paramagnetic rock and rub it all over your fingernails and hands. Joe, well, when you're getting close to your nap time, so Joe, well, you're getting close to your nap time, and so we'll wait another year before we see each other. I think you should put pamphlets out. Nobody reads volumes anymore, but if you put out quick-to-read good books and or pamphlets, you'd sell. I think where your big deal is when you talk to people in short bits. Bruce Halstead wrote these big, thick books that were 3 inches thick. As time went on, he wrote these little pamphlets that sold. He was making money selling pamphlets. Phil, I think I got something over here. Phil gets up to look for his pamphlet. Phil, I found one of the pamphlets. That's about the Virgin Guadalupe. Joe, I've never seen this one. Reproduction of the Tilma of the Virgin of Guadalupe. Phil, the Catholic Church put this out. They didn't sell much and there are not many left. They're out of print. Joe, I'll buy this one. Winnie, no, we have some left. There's about 3 or 4. Joe, I never read much about the Virgin of Guadalupe. An artist friend of mine, he passed away. He made millions of dollars on religious paintings. Phil, that's visible and that's infrared. It's got no drawing under it. Any watercolor painter draws a picture first before they paint. Also, the face isn't pigment. It's diffraction radiation. It's white limestone and light is refracted from it, so it looks like a face. It's an incredible picture. Close-up of the Virgin Guadalupe reproduction. Joe, I never saw this before. I never saw this book before. Phil, no, you won't. It's out of print now, too. Winnie, they were never for sale, honey. Phil, I never sold anything. Acre sells them. Joe reads a quote from the pamphlet, The Tilma Under Infrared Radiation. Joe, let me learn the lessons you have hidden in every leaf and rock. Phil, it's an old Indian prayer. It's the oldest Indian prayer. Indians didn't write, though. That was written when? Joe, the ancient Turks didn't have a written language. I have a lot of Indians that visit me, and some of them stay quite a while. Willie Whitefeather came through once a year just to stay with us. Now he wrote a book on survival, and it actually saved some kids' lives. They remember what they read about Willie, and it got a national write-up. Marilyn, it's written for kids, but it's got information for adults. Joe, now, I don't understand all the things about infrared and far infrared. Far infrared is what's catching the attention of astronomers. Phil demonstrates waveforms using his fingers. Light is a wavelength this long, infrared is that long, and far infrared is this long. Instead of little short wavelengths, they get longer and longer. Joe, when this is ingested in your body, you're getting internal heat, and it's almost like getting a temperature to get rid of a virus. Phil, you're getting rid of radiation without heating the body up. The heat will kill you beyond 106 degrees temperature. Joe, did you do a book on the cloth like this? Phil, it's in a book. It's a chapter in a book. I did the work on the shroud and I did the work on the Virgin of Guadalupe. I'm the only man in the world that's touched both of them. After I did the work on the Virgin, they invited me to Italy to do the work on the Shroud of Turin. I'm going to write a whole book on it. Joe, you really believe that they were inspired? Phil, oh yeah, the Shroud of Turin is quite a shroud for certain. There's no question about it. Nobody could have painted it. It would be impossible. It's a radiation image, which was formed by high energy. When Christ rose from the dead, it was from high nuclear energy that actually photographed the shroud, made an impression. When you open it up, his back is on one side and his head is on the other side. It's a piece of cloth that folds over from the back to the front. Joe, the imagery is paramagnetic. Phil, sure, it's diamagnetic cloth and paramagnetic iron oxide. What happened? Because typically they didn't take baths. There was a lot of soil. He dragged that cross along ways, getting the soil all over his body, which had the iron oxide. As he died, there was a burst of energy, and all that iron oxide was dragged out, impregnating the shroud. I actually ran experiments on that. I would take a piece of damp cloth and put some iron oxide on it, and the iron oxide would migrate to wherever there would be electrical energy. I took pictures. Joe, when people die, there is a burst of energy that is measurable in grams. The French made a lot of studies on this, but they could never capture that. They put domes over it and glass over it. They did everything in the world to watch that way. Phil, that's because it's different energy. Neutrons have no energy. They have no minus and no plus. It can be measured with certain instruments, but the neutrons, you can't control it. You can't store it. To measure something, you have to store it first. Neutrons are going right through us now, which is the bad thing about never leaving your house. It cuts down on the neutrons. Joe, neutrons leave us with certain transferable energy? Phil, yeah, sure, you need it. Joe, neutrons will go right through a block of lead. Phil, you die if you had any in your body. You get it from the sun, of course, but they go right through you. In one experiment that cost $600 million, they filled a cave full of water, and it finally got to a point where they could actually measure the neutrons. The neutron had to go through a couple of miles of water. Joe, they did this under the mines in Japan. Something about with the neutron tubes, and there was an implosion. It cost millions of dollars to replace it. They replaced it immediately. Phil, they collapsed the original tubes and they had to make them stronger. Joe, whenever they were taking pictures of this, they could catch a neutron going through the water, but they always had to have a man on the camera. If they had a camera without a rain on it, they couldn't get a picture. But a camera running by itself wouldn't catch it. They could never understand why. Phil, you had to have a brain process it. Well, there is no computer to process it. Your brain's the computer. The brain understands neutrons. The brain receives and broadcasts the right frequency that understands the neutron to capture the image. Joe, passionate. I could never understand why would people, well, like you and the other people, I'm a nobody. I'm not an educated person. Why will people talk to me like that and tolerate me? Teller and Halstead, we became all friends. And you? Phil, Tiller was a down-to-earth man. Joe, you know what I'm saying about these people. I'm not in their class. I'm like a parasite living off very important people. Phil, oh, yes, you are. It's like my father used to say that. He never went to college, but he ended up being a brigadier general for a week in the war. I went from corporal to sergeant to captain to lieutenant colonel in a year. He did the same thing, like father, like son. Joe, I've often wondered about it. The people that talk to me and spend time with me, and I knew a geologist, Dr. Pai. He was a teacher at the University of Arizona. And tape. Dr. Phillip has not yet received a Congressional Medal of Honor. His hope was to voice the truth about our planet and our health. It is assumed his voice would have irreversible damaging effect to the cartels that run the industry of ill health, corruption in agriculture, as well as prevent the detrimental effectiveness HARP has on the environment and Earth's inhabitants. Paramagnetism is an internal key to saving this planet, as we can see it being dismantled at an exponential rate. You will not find Phil Callahan's name in such seemingly reputable information web depositories such as Wikipedia. The Wikipedia page on paramagnetism, although he invented the term, not only doesn't mention his name, but doesn't list the common terms that reference to paramagnetic characteristics such as iron oxide, ferrous oxide, pink granite, basalt, granite, and all of the items of information shared in this interview. Not Phil Callahan, nor his 18 published books on entomology, infrared radiation, paramagnetics, natural phenomena, and the many scientific papers are noted on Wikipedia. This is one clear example where information is suppressed at the level of mass information and educational venues that would otherwise damage the powerful industry that educates them. Both Phil Callahan and Joe Blankinship share a strong desire to educate our youth. Well, it's been a journey, and thank you for all the information you guys have given us.